Kid of Arcadia. Chapter 13. Forced to fit. The thinners I got from the doctors did little more than knock me out and keep me feeling low, even at 10 megs a day before bed, but I still had to take them. Someone out there was paying for me to have my happy pills, and from the kindness of their hearts made damn sure I took them. But if anything gave me relief, it was because their therapy was more about keeping me alive now, and less about me. The diversion worked. "You're on imipramine now?" "Those are thinners," was the first thing Josh said when I told him about it back in the room over homework the next night, but I didn't know what he was talking about. They'd just released me. I screwed up. I said something stupid, I said, and shook my head to douse that new ringing in my ears. He must have told him he wanted to die. I looked up from my paper a second, unsurprised he'd guessed it, and turned back to fill out another textbook question as he began running his mouth as usual. His psychic powers once again tested true, and I'm sure he was proud of himself. When I ran away from my last roof, I made the mistake of going back. They stuck me in the hall for a few months, put me on writ, and said I was a troublemaker. Then they let me go on probation because they took such bad care of me there. That's how they apologize, I guess. But I swear someone's cleaning up on us every time we admit to something, he explained. His gap-toothed mouth never ran out of stories, and it made me want to jump in with some of my own, but he never let me get a word in edgewise. The first second I had a patch of silence, he filled it with one baritone guff of a muffled fart. "Oh, fuck you," I laughed, pulling my shirt over my nose, getting up to get away from the smell as we both gave a few chuckles over it. For me, anything that could amuse me in them days was rare, so I let it. It reminded me of Eliot. The new drugs drew the life out of me every evening just to whirl me back awake before the sun. What was sleep again? I certainly wasn't acquainted with it anymore. In fact, some mornings I'd just sit back on that top bunk with my arms tucked in behind my head and watch the dawn go wash over the white ceiling as it rolled its fingers across that smooth surface only a foot above me. There were shadows like clouds and birds chirping outside like seagulls, and I could almost feel the bed spiraling in a current, rocking back and forth. For hours every morning I was lost at sea, dreading the new day's dawn. Then getting up forced me to trade that shortness of breath for dizziness because any movement that early made me nauseous. I spent a good amount of time every morning bent on the bathroom sink to watch my reflections go merry-go-round in the mirror. Along with the sweats and shakes, no matter how humid or chilled the air, at times I could have sworn a nail was being driven in the back of my skull, or that my brain was pushing out my eyes. That script was a doozy on me. Josh always slept late on the weekends, and in that time alone I'd just sit at my desk near the window and stare into the morning sun at the backyard marsh, blinking and licking my lips compulsively. The word escape kept steaming forward in a breathy voice from some place in the back of my head where the nail was driving itself. There was nothing to do in that house but sit around feeling like a bug stomped in the pavement with its wings and legs still kicking long after its head had been crushed. Getting to the bathroom was always a battle in the morning. Sure, there were 2 bathrooms in the house, but only one shower, the upstairs one. Often I'd find myself having to wait in line at the bathroom upstairs just to shower, and then go downstairs with my toothbrush only to wait in line down there to brush my teeth. You couldn't spend too long in either one, not even to crap, and especially in the mornings when I need to the most. Sometimes it couldn't wait, and I'd have to run downstairs just to use the toilet only to come back and have Josh or someone else slip into the shower before me. Needless to say, most days I didn't shower at all. We only had so much time before we had to get to the bus stop. And of course, with at least 3 or 4 others using the bathrooms at the same time, the place always reeked and whoever came in after you would always chap your ass for it, even if it wasn't you, and especially if you took too long using it. So you had to be severely self-conscious about it the whole time you were in there. And to make it worse, I guess Josh decided at some point that he just didn't give a damn because he'd trash the bathrooms almost every day, piss on the seat, flush handfuls of toilet paper and just leave it draping everywhere. Or he'd just not flush it at all. He'd leave his puddles all over the floor so that when I walked in with my clean socks, they'd be soaked all day. I don't know why he did it, but it was definitely on purpose. I mean, he went out of his way to trash that place, and then he'd leave and go, "It's all yours." It was some power trip for him or something. The shower was always slimy and cold, and all you could think of while you were in it were the others in there naked before you, and you couldn't leave anything behind or else they'd call you a slob, steal it, or throw it in the trash. I left a sock in there once and sure enough ended up losing it. Soon I figured that if I was ever going to get to use the shower, I'd have to get up extra early, which I was used to anyways because I couldn't sleep, but then I'd always be nodding off during second period. We'd make our way downstairs at some point, once we were somewhat washed and dressed, and sit down where our toaster breakfast awaited us. The other woman would be crisscrossing the kitchen, making sure we dressed ourselves, wiped our faces, and had our portions. I always wore my windbreaker then because the house was too damn chilly for me, and the sun made a little difference. It only shined in through the window to the extent that it reflected off the bricks the next one over. We ate in silence, so spaced out we had nothing much to say. 3 of us were now on meds, and our script bottles lined the window pane, glistening orange in the sunlight. A paper chart displaying each of our schedules was tacked on the side of the cupboard, and around the corner sat a couple black trash bags against the wall, each with a name on it. A new face already graced the breakfast table. The brothers were gone, and in their place came Gus, or Blondie as we called him, in full, who had quickly become Josh's better friend. I forced down the granite bricks that were every bite of toast to make that woman happy, but was never up for eating. Anyone with a history of running was forced to take on the harder chores because it was the only way she could keep us accountable. Josh always talked back, shook his head and rolled his eyes, or knocked something over and walked away at every demand. The time of day made all the difference over whether he did his chores. When the woman didn't feel like putting up a fight in the late afternoon, or if she was busy dealing with another kid, she passed her job onto his pills, something he knew he had no choice about. If the dishes didn't get done, who cares? But if he didn't take his pills, he'd have the state to contend with. He was good at picking his fights and was less ambitious on the script. We all were. The 3 of us boys would hang around the living room and backyard as the woman usually kept the little girl entertained and productive on the carpet. There was always some board game or jigsaw puzzle down there to give us something to do while she ran around on errands and appointments, always leaving us alone with her creep son, which was like being on her own. As far as I could tell, that woman had no purpose outside of doing things with and for us. She'd been a foster parent for many years, and none of that had changed even after her family was gone. Her own kids had grown and split, save for one, and she was divorced, so now her home was little more than a well-funded daycare without the quality control. Come to think of it, maybe she just needed some reason to justify living all alone in that 4-bedroom house of hers. I still don't have a clue. So on the weekends I'd just hang on the couch arm with my chin firmly rested on the pins and needles spreading like a rash along my hand and watch those television kid shows for hours. I had no choice. I was so strung out those days. No one else could touch the remote when the little one was in the room, so I was stuck watching all those trippy shorts I used to stare at belly down on the floor when I was her age, the same Simon in the Land of Chalk drawings and Bagpuss and Emily and Alfie Atkins, etc. She'd sprawl out in front of me no younger than Eliot, and I couldn't bear to watch her. I knew all those little gestures. There's no way they'd let me stay there if they got me on misconduct like my caseworker was hell-bent to prove. Eliot could have made some friends here, I told myself. He just needed some actual friends. Every one of those weekends around noon, Josh and his new Blondie friend Gus would move out to the backyard with a deflated kickball, and I'd watch them from the couch dodging around the square through the blinds. After an hour of kicks and blocks back and forth on the grass, often hopping the fence to fetch the ball when it flew over, and some shovey play fights, they'd be called in and sent upstairs. No one could play nicely in that house very long, and Josh spent more time locked up in the bedroom than anywhere else most days. It didn't really make a difference to me because just living there felt like a prison. There was no escape, and yet there were doors everywhere. Moping around again, Jared? You're not being punished anymore. Go back with Gus, the woman often insisted. Even then, Gus liked to be by himself most of the time. But I'd just sit in the muggy noon instead, totally spaced out, shaking and sweating in my windbreaker and watching the clouds drift by. The afternoon sun would drape across the living room rug and the girl with her cards, dominoes, and dice rolls on the carpet, and then the evening would set in and the games would go away. The woman would gather us all together for some kind of structured talk before starting dinner, and each of us would have to spill our guts because she said it was healthy, at least healthier than our old homes were. If only she knew. It's best not to think about them. They can't hurt you here, she said, or something like that at least. The next weekend my caseworker showed up to drive me to the psychiatrist just as the sky went orange and shadows crept so long across the grass they were on the verge of disappearing. The air was fresh and alive even in the dead heat, and the clouds seemed to part on those same back streets and main drags, those highways and off-ramps, that parking space and path and up the main steps. There was no feeling quite like going to see the therapist after a few weeks of slugging it through the endless routine of school and the weekend pill-fed droopy days. I dreaded it, but at least I could say it was something. All at once I could see what Eliot saw every day of his life as I rode in that back seat watching the sky so powerless. I even began seeing planets scooting by out the car window, Space stations must have blinked little red lights high in the air over the sun-baked red afternoon of the Martian landscape out there, that endless expanse of orange rock and sand. Any escape from that prison house was godsend. He must have known it. "How's Eliot?" I sneered. I loved teasing her. "Jared," she began, ignoring the question, "when you opened up the other day about that horrible thing that happened to you, many more pieces started falling into place, more than I thought. It's because you're here, and we're slowly helping you," she rattled off, almost convincing me. "Good for you," I whispered. The psychiatrist and I had spooned anxiety from the room with every visit, and by then we must have been scraping the bottom because I hadn't any left. She asked me questions like why I wore my windbreaker and how I was handling the meds, rather than the constant gold digging. She was used to me. "Good," I said. Most of them I had spit out. Once depleted of small talk, she picked up where we left off, about how what I was doing to Eliot was harmful, how what Broder had done to me was harmful, like I didn't know these things, the difference between guilt and shame and such. I never told her about what Broder did to me exactly, but it was just enough to draw out her sympathetic sighs. Coming clean about what I had been put through with him actually gave me more power over her than I knew what to do with, but the first thing I did with it was deem her unworthy to hear the whole story. "I just got used to it," I said, keeping it vague. "You got used to a lot that must have hurt you," she said. "I guess." "You ever get used to your father not being there?" "Yeah," I said, slouching on the seat to drum my fingers on the leather. "Would have been nice, I guess." "What would have?" "Well, I never really knew him. Eliot did, not me." "What did you think about Eliot at first?" she asked. "That he was a mistake." "Do you think Eliot got used to you?" The words hit me hard. I froze and counted all the tacks on the corkboard across from me. She was trying to wring the truth out, and always set up each question like the confession of the century, only to toss it off like nothing afterwards. She wasn't probing me for answers, just leading me to questions. "I don't know," I said. And so the rest of the session would soldier on, and in no time 30 minutes would pass, and I'd feel a little more human once again. By then my brain was usually rearing to go like every boxer I'd ever watched, feeling that with a few slight jabs I could take on all her questions. Since I'd let her in to see the real me, there was no more hiding, no more wondering what to say or skating around. Because despite it all, I trusted her. We were no longer faceless. She knew when to push and when to back off and always let me have my say, and I respected that about her. That's how she got me to agree to bring in my dream journal for the next session. I actually thought she'd get a kick out of seeing what a kid like me had been writing. Sometime during my stay, the sky had turned over cobalt. Streetlights poured circles on the roadways and halos on the windshield upon re-entry to Earth. Returning to the group home left me dreading how I'd be locked up in that speck of the universe for yet another miserable week with nothing to look forward to but another appointment. There were just no breaks. Not even my weekend was sacred to these people. The caseworker never said anything, and I never felt as alone with another person as I did those nights riding back with her. Then I'd just sit up in the room, wait for dinner, and talk with Josh about random and useless things as the nights would fall down around us. At some point the woman would come upstairs and hand me a pill and a glass of water, and I knew then I had a good hour of feeling okay left before it sank. There were now 5 of us around the table each night at 8, with this new teen girl just dropped in from out of the blue, or out of hell if you asked me. The woman would busy herself in the kitchen to serve us some of her old Cold War bomb shelter rations, and we'd all gather at the kitchen table like animals at a trough for it. Sometimes the clatter spurred on my headaches, and other times I could hear cars rolling by outside in the silence. Then she'd throw down a plate for me to stare at, with a vegetable side, a meat side, and a whatever side. The only thing ever missing was a main course, but I still had to eat it, or she'd tell my caseworker I was starving myself, and then the psychiatrist would be raking me over the coals for that too. There was no escape, so I'd take a few gulps to hold back my sickness and force it down, wishing I could have stuffed the fork along with it to gag myself for good. The new teen girl was always rubbing her eyes. Across from her usually sat Josh with his long scrapes up and down his arms, and next to him, his curly-haired blondie friend Gus would be whispering to himself in prayer. The little girl would jump up and down in the corner, and I'd just sit a few feet from the exit in my windbreaker, too woozy to keep my eyes focused and too jittery to sit still. Everyone would just go on eating. "Fuck this!" The new teen girl pounded the table one night, startling all of us out of our zonked-out daze. "What's your problem?" the woman asked. "The same old shit. You don't let me go out after 7 for this shit? What the fuck am I missing here?" she yelled. "Where you gonna go?" the woman asked. Josh held up his plastic knife and squinted at the girl, waving it through the air in front of him like he was going to slit her throat. She saw this and shot an arm across the table like a rattlesnake, grabbed the knife and hurled it back at him in one pass. He didn't budge or blink, even as it bounced off his shoulder. "What the hell is wrong with you?" the girl asked. "Hey," the woman shouted. "She's acting like a big spoiled baby and was doing it all day, and I'm sick of it." Josh leaned back in his chair. "Oh, grow up, you little jerk-off," the girl retorted. He picked up his plastic fork and lowered his brows, eyeing her like an attack dog or like he was going to stab her, and she rolled her eyes in return, turning away from the table. "Did you hear what she just called me?" Josh looked to the woman still tending the little one at the table. "Forget her," the woman said, unwilling to deal with a tantrum at a late hour like that, and then mumbled to herself, as she often did, "I tell them all the time I can handle 4. When they give me 5, it's just too much." Tensions were high and Josh was upset, but not with the new girl. He was just tense like we all were by the end of the day in that cage. He picked a carrot piece off his plate and winged it at the girl when she wasn't looking, which I thought was hilarious, but then she slammed her fist down and launched herself to her feet, making all the silverware jump on the table. He did the same, so she reached across and grabbed a hold of his shirt like she was going to strangle him over the table, knocking over a glass of milk in the process. Blondie boy Gus stood and backed away as Josh used both his arms and all his muscle to push the girl's grip off, grunting and swearing. "That's enough. 2 check marks to the both of you. Go to your rooms," the woman yelled. Josh wriggled out of the girl's grasp and tumbled backwards on the floor, so she bent down to drag him to the hallway, thrashing and kicking. Blondie and the woman swarmed in to break them up. The little girl stood at the threshold to watch the fight, and I just looked on from my seat, too out of it to care. I didn't want to watch Josh getting pummeled by the girl over there, so I dropped my eyes to the spilt milk spreading beneath my chair. The woman dialed the phone for the cops and explained what was going down as Blondie tugged at the teen girl's waist, trying to pry her off Josh. Then she came around the corner with the phone still in hand, and Josh sat up to beat at her as she attempted to hoist him up by her other arm. "Don't touch me! You're not allowed to touch me! What are you, some pervert?" he screamed. "Get upstairs now," the woman shouted. "You old bitch! When the cops show up, tell them. Tell them how you tried to rape me. Tell them." Both of them were escorted upstairs to be shut up in their rooms, and the 3 of us went back to eating. When the woman came down, she cleaned the milk puddle on the floor and penciled in 2 check marks on the board next to their names. Josh already had 5 that week, so I sat back and sighed. It wouldn't be the first time I'd be locked up in there with him for a problem he started. I was getting used to it. The coppers finally came a-knocking as usual about 20 minutes later, and took their little stroll around the house as if investigating a crime scene. Their flashing lights bounced all over the lawn and the neighbors' houses outside, blinking red and blue on the curtains and ceilings. They had rushed over ready to break up a fight, but with it already settled, needed something to make the whole trip worthwhile, so they stomped upstairs to speak with Josh and the girl for a few minutes and then quickly left. Then the bedrooms were locked. After dinner, we could usually hang out in the living room and fight over the TV, do our homework or play some kind of game or puzzle to try to wind us down before bed. I'd just sit on the couch in the corner of the room with the blinding floor lamp and watch whatever they decided I was going to be watching, bored and dazed out of my mind and trying to keep my head straight. Sometimes I'd be sitting there trying to fit 250-piece puzzles together on the coffee table for hours every night, but I could never finish any of them because the others would destroy whatever I had worked on day to day. That night I just sat there doing a puzzle and watching a bit of this Little House on the Prairie episode where this new girl, Sylvia, gets stalked and raped by some guy, but her father can't be bothered and her classmates all just end up teasing her for it, and yet Albert remains friendly to her. The whole time I just sat there watching it, feeling sicker and sicker, almost hot-flashed, with that old anger welling back up my spine like a spike from my ass, like I could still feel the weight of that guy's body on me, holding me down. All I could think was I knew what she was going through. I actually understood it, even as everyone else there was just treating it like any other thing on TV that night. I gulped heavy saliva down and held back tears the whole time, picturing the woods all over again in my mind, and yet trying not to. But I wasn't a woman or a girl. I wasn't a queer either, and yet it happened to me. How could it? How come it could happen to me but not to any other guy in existence? What was wrong with me? Was I just too weak to fight him off? Was it my fault I went with Broder into the woods that day, just like always? It had all happened to me, too. At some point I had to get out of that room. I ran off to the bathroom, locked myself in, ran the water blasting in the sink, and plunked myself down on the toilet lid once again. Anything to get away and create some noise so I could silence my thoughts. Anything so they wouldn't have to see me as I shook and shivered and hunched over. Once again, no one was happy I was in there so long. Like always. When bedtime came, I needed to be led into the room with Josh, and I immediately headed for my bunk, climbed up, and was out of sight as the door clicked shut behind me. I didn't even bother acknowledging him sitting at his desk. That night he was doing that slicing thing he did. Ugh, that again? I grunted. Leave me alone. Everyone else does. He did his bloody finger-pricking shit so often as I lay in that bunk that I actually started getting into it myself. It was sick, I know, but something about his self-induced blood spattering was a relief to me too, and as much as I hated seeing it, I was powerless to stop it, like so many other things. All the little devils stood on end once again demanding that I go through with it, but I suppressed them because he was still in the room. We were all so powerless over ourselves back then. You didn't tell your shrink about me doing this, right? That's the last thing I need, he said. I didn't, I said. I knew more than most that some things were better left a secret. If they were too blind to notice his sliced cuts and pockmarked arms, then they didn't deserve to treat him for it. He was a canvas of red lines under there. Thanks, man, he said. While locked up that night, we talked about that time he ran away from his group home with his uncle who had given him asylum at his place. I asked him what asylum was, and he said it was when you run away from people who want you dead or alive. I asked if the cops ever came looking for him when he ran away from his last roof, and he said they only look around your home and stick you on a missing persons list. Other than that, they don't do much. Once you run away, though, he said, you're completely on your own, and there's no feeling quite like it in the world. I asked him why he ever came back if it was so good out there, and he said an argument with his uncle forced him to come back. He wished he'd never had that argument. By then I was shaking with desire, but my eyes were too heavy, and it took all the strength in me to stay awake long enough just to hear out the rest of his adventures. After a while the questions ceased and the dreaming began, and I'd be on my own. I'd be hopping over the back fence and jogging out into those dark marshes and trees, flying off by night like making a prison break. There'd be searchlights creeping along the forest floor in the dark, but I'd hug tightly to the tree backs, duck behind bushes, and tuck down stream beds whenever one flew past. I'd leap from bank to bank into the bullfrog swamp, my ears and eyes straining into the darkness. At the border I'd rejoice in my sweat, my feet aching and my heart leaping at my lungs. I wouldn't care if they shot me down right there because they'd only be killing a free kid. The endless forest before me, I'd laugh through the pain and only stop to drink from the rivers. I'd run and not stop running into the dark, even long after their beams ran out. I'd disappear in the night, grow my hair wild, forget about the human race, and no one would ever find me. I rolled over and over with the pillow and hugged it until it became how I imagined Kelly to my touch, comfy and cuddled up, and then drifted off to sleep before the lights outside went out. Those days I fell asleep staring into Eliot's fragile eyes and the only shot I had of him left, wishing I could just sleep and dream it up all over again, being a good big brother for him. That feeling never left me. They never gave me the chance. When the memories faded and the dreams were done, the sun would come poking through the windows to signal yet another day. I'd wake up in hell all over again, with the meds banging me in the head and kicking my ass.